the first time in this space? All right, so super welcome. So this is an amazing venue that you all are sitting in this evening. I would welcome you all and personally invite you all to make your way back to the History Museum. The main exhibit area is sight to see. We have some amazing permanent exhibits and a temporary exhibit upstairs. The museum is closed for the evening, so we are just doing this special event tonight. So I welcome you all back to this space at your earliest convenience. So welcome. This is our Port Lecture Hampton series that we're going to be conducting this evening. We have an amazing roster, so if you all have tuned into some of these conversations, we've got a social media audience as well as you all in person, so you all have seen some of the work that comes out of these shows. They are very thoughtful, very thought-provoking, and very much curated for the education and entertainment value that you all are hopefully privy to, but if not, we're going to open up an amazing presentation from an amazing facilitator this evening. I don't want to take up too much of you all's time, but I did want to give you all a few highlights of some things to come here in the city of Hampton. So if you all are not familiar, Mosaic Festival is on its way. Mosaic Festival is our second year that we're bringing an amazing multicultural international festival to the city of Hampton. So it's Saturday, April 20th. And it's taking place right downtown Hampton. The main stage is at Mill Point Park, and our footprint is going to extend on the surrounding area, and it's to celebrate the cultures that make up Hampton, all of the cultures that have evolved here in Hampton, as well as celebrating Earth Day and the planet that we all share. So it's an amazing day of culture, food, entertainment, exhibits, live art, opportunities for you to help create community art, and it's all free. The only thing that you would have to purchase with any food or trinkets that you like to take home with you and your families. And then our next event, of course, is our fabulous Phoebus Pride Festival. And I'm very thankful that our office, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, is a co-sponsor for that event. This will be our 8th year, and we do it a little different here in Hampton. So we block off about 3 or 4 blocks of a street downtown in Phoebus, and we just do a big street party. So you all are definitely invited. That is Saturday, June 8th, and it's taking place in the historic Phoebus district, downtown Phoebus on Mellon Street. So please mark your calendars for those dates. We would love for you all to join us then. I don't want to take too much time from our guest this evening, but this gentleman is no stranger to the Hampton Roads area. There's an amazing book and amazing resources that he's contributed to. One of them is a personal in my collection, LGBT History of Hampton Roads. I'm not going to steal his shine, but please, ladies and gentlemen, I would love to introduce, and you help me welcome Dr. Ford. Dr. Charles Ford. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you for coming tonight to see this screening of our Hampton movie, a film about 18 minutes long, with all kinds of stops all around the city of historical significance. Hampton never had an identifiably gay or lesbian space, unlike Norfolk or some of the other cities of Hampton Roads, but it certainly had a very rich LGBT history, actually from the beginning. As you'll see, this film, unlike our Ghent film, is much more chronological. It covers more centuries, more time than just the 1970s to the present. And of course, this whole film series is a work in progress. This will be one of almost 20 films we'll have, 4 on Norfolk and then 1 for each of the 7 cities, or maybe 2 of them. And again, we're finding more and more stories each and every day. But this one will be much more on civil rights than red lights tonight. It was 2 years in the making. As you'll see, different hairstyles for me, different clothing. We try to keep it standard, but of course, there was little mix-ups there. My videographer is a professional videographer, TOC Creative in Norfolk. Jason and Matthew Olomanowski, very great people there. And of course, thanks to the Hampton Roads Pride Board for supporting this effort, this prototypes, so we can then pitch it to a larger foundation, maybe the Mellon Foundation or the Ford Foundation, to provide that kind of community enrichment that only history can provide, I think. Everyone has a history. And of course, for a long time it was thought that LGBT people just came out of the woodwork 10 years ago, right? Or every 10 years. But that's not the case at all. It's a very long history, very rich history, as you'll see. Thanks to all kinds of people. Rudy Almanzar, who was the president of Hampton Roads Pride at the time, they funded me 2 years ago. We also have Bruce Newton, makes an appearance in the film, of the Hampton Tourism Board. We have Michael Hamer and Barry Menser, prominent people here locally, who were also in the film. Carlton Hardy, who's here tonight in our audience, a longtime resident of the peninsula. Kevin Pritchard also makes an appearance. Michael Curry from the American Theater. Arthur Minoche from Newport News. So many people went into their ideas and their stories. Kathleen Rhodes also from Old Dominion University. And also J.D. Doyle has a whole film and music catalog of both Virginia and Texas, because I've written both on both places. It's very interesting. He was here last month talking about his book. So when you think of LGBT history, you think of the standard popular history of Stonewall and maybe Chicago and San Francisco. The Stonewall Rebellion of 1969 provided the line between the oppression of the closet and the emergence of liberation in this story, while San Francisco's Castro neighborhood stood as a model community that fostered an oasis of freedom in the 1970s. The American South only makes an occasional appearance in these narratives, and that's been challenged, thankfully, in the last generation with the work of James T. Sears, C. Riley Snorton, Jay Watkins, who's actually at William and Mary. He's written on the Florida Panhandle and LGBT people there. John Howard, years ago. James Sears also wrote about the Unitarian Church in Norfolk 25 years ago. So this has been a generation of local Southern history, and this film is within that historiography. Again, it looks at the chronological piece, so it's sort of chronological. It goes along. It begins at the very beginning of settlement. There's some background, and then it goes from there into the 20th century. So it's quite comprehensive in terms of its chronology. Ambitious in that sense. Although, of course, because it took 2 years to do and to come about, there were, of course, all kinds of stories that I had to, I didn't know about until the film was done, right? Some of those stories, again, would be Diana Ross, the famous drag performer here for at least almost 50 years. She began in Hampton and actually was, she knew the puppeteer, Jerry Holiday, who became very famous here. And the two of them, their activism and their coming out was brought about by anti-war protests here in Hampton in the very late 1960s, early 70s. So I didn't know that until, so I could add that to actually the Norfolk, one of the Norfolk stories about the Q Club, because both of them would be very centered there, their work there in the 1970s, but they got their start in Hampton. Another thing would be a network of working class women coming out of the military, military veterans that Kathleen Rhodes has done. So that's another story. And there's another story about Kevin Pritchard himself, who appears in the film. He was a distributor of Out and About during the 2000 aughts. He lives in Hampton. He lived in Hampton with his family for years. His main thing was also in Newport News in Norfolk, so again, I'm going to pick up his story there. But Hampton has all kinds of connections, and just because Hampton didn't have a gay bar or a lesbian bar doesn't mean that there was no history here. There's a lot of history, as you'll see. So please enjoy it. Again, it's just a rough draft in many ways, right? Prototype in order to get more funding for a larger project, again, called Red Lights and Civil Rights. But again, Red Lights is more Norfolk. Civil Rights, you'll see, is more Hampton. So without further ado, I'd like to show the film.
All right. Thank you so very much. So as we're preparing for the
It
film.
begins a little earlier than what it would show up here, so just, you have to go back a little bit.
Gotcha. All right.
The city of Hampton has never had an explicitly queer restaurant or space, but that doesn't mean it hasn't had a very rich history over the years that pertains to LGBTQ peoples and their cultures. Indeed, Hampton residents have contributed a lot to the awareness. The city of Hampton has never had an explicitly queer restaurant or space, but that doesn't mean it hasn't had a very rich history over the years that pertains to LGBTQ peoples and their cultures. Indeed, Hampton residents have contributed a lot to the awareness and equality over the last century, and indeed, pride can be found everywhere. Here I am in front of Hampton's History Museum. I've invited a few friends today to discuss some of Hampton's hidden history, the history of its LGBT people, which isn't discussed too much. So let's go inside and say hello. Hampton has a long history. It's one of the oldest continuously settled places in America by the English since 1608. And of course, there were people there thousands of years, millennia beforehand, since the 12,000 years ago. And so, if you want to talk a little bit about that background, give some of that background so we can get into the LGBT history.
About 20 years ago or more, Dennis Blanton, the archaeologist, came into the office, and he had an arrowhead in his hand. Mm-hmm. And he almost came over the desk. He was so excited, and it was a paleo Indian point. Mm-hmm. And that paleo, it was down on the side of the Air and Space Center when they were doing the archaeology there. And it's really interesting to find a Stone Age artifact from the Space Age institution. At any rate, that arrowhead is the oldest man-made object found here in what is today Hampton. It was 12,000 years old, which meant Native Americans roamed, lived, hunted in this area that long ago. Well, that's the beginning of our history. That's the genesis of it. There's much more. In the 17th century, early 17th century, the English come here, the Virginia Company of London. They come here looking for wealth. They really want to find gold. Right. And they were disappointed there, but they did find tobacco. Yes. And tobacco became Virginia's gold. And it became like wildfire in the colonies and in Europe. It was very, very, very much in demand. It was addictive, right? Obviously. Addictive too, addictive. And after Alice James, the King James had, King James did have a, yes, he did. Really problem with that. And so, but tobacco was a rage, and what happens here in Hampton, it becomes a tobacco port. Right. And Hampton is a town because it's convenient. It's near the ocean, and the ocean is linked to the bay, and the bay is linked to Hampton. So you have this going back and forth. So Hampton becomes a tobacco port. Tobacco leaves Hampton and to Europe, and manufactured goods come here. And that's why Hampton is here. Here we are at Risley Street, named after Henry Risley, the third Earl of Southampton, who was important because he was an investor in the Virginia Company, which launched and managed England's first permanent colonies. The title was more important than his name, in that the title gave Hampton Roads its name, and also the city of Hampton. In the 16 teens, when he was an investor, Risley was a conventionally dressed Jacobean gentleman with a father with children, a businessman. By the 1590s, he dressed apparently very differently. A recently discovered portrait shows him in the guise of a young teenage girl, a beautiful girl. And apparently that girl was the crush, the muse, the patron of the very famous playwright William Shakespeare during his very productive decade of the 1590s. Hampton loves to celebrate its connections with colonial pirates, holding a festival, an annual festival, the Blackbeard Festival, named after the most famous pirate of them all, Blackbeard, whose head was prominently displayed right around here as a warning to others not to join him in his marauding and his looting. The purpose, though, for us, though, is, I think, very important, that the pirates were fluid in their sexuality and their gender identity.
Pirates could be, again, involved in shipboard romances with the same sex. No one cared. They could also be cross-dressing. No one cared. And this was mainly due, I think, due to the gender ratio, lopsided gender ratio in the Caribbean towards men over women, far more men than women, which made these kinds of opportunities for fluidity apparent and also unobserved and not really noticed at the time. Whereas, of course, the Royal Navy would punish sodomy very severely. Leonard Maklavic was the first ever American member of the military to volunteer the information that he was indeed openly homosexual. That was very, very controversial and led to a Time magazine cover of September 8, 1975, where he declared openly, "I am homosexual." Maklavic was called the Good Soldier before and after his coming out. He was a decorated Vietnam veteran, native of Georgia, and had 2 medals, a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. He was very, very well liked in the military, and he came to the insight to come out by becoming a race relations instructor and saw the similarities between the African American civil rights struggle and the LGBTQ struggle for equality. He also he socialized in Norfolk at the Q Club and inspired members of the Unitarian Gay and Lesbian Caucus to go further with their activism. And eventually, that was the same caucus that formed the Our Own Community Press in 1976. Maklavic remained very conservative, though. Politically, he was a Republican throughout his life, but he insisted that the federal courts give him an honorable discharge, which they ruled in his favor frequently, but the litigation was unending, and he accepted a cash settlement in 1981. He moved to California, to Guerneville. He opened up a pizza parlor, was there for about 3 years, and then moved to San Francisco, where he sold Ford cars and became very involved in HIV/AIDS activism as the pandemic began to rage. He himself would be claimed by AIDS on June 22nd, 1988, and he was only a few months short of his 45th birthday, tragedy. But he insisted on his tombstone that there was an inscription that read as following: "A gay Vietnam veteran. When I was in the military, I got a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving 1. Phoebus was its own independent town until 1952, when it was taken over by Hampton, but a lot of people saw it as part of Hampton anyway. About 30 years beforehand, Phoebus was known as Little Chicago, where a lot of gangster activity and bootlegging went on during the year of Prohibition. But even before that, in the late 19th century, Phoebus would feature about 52 saloons, and itself was named after a hotel resort owner, Harrison Phoebus. It's at the gateway to Fort Monroe, and it's a very nice location here in Hampton. It features today a series of restaurants and shops, but not as many saloons as in 1900. Phoebus provided, for that time, a little bit of downtown Norfolk on the Lower Peninsula. But the culture was never as public as in Norfolk, that sailor culture, and I think that contributed to the private nature of the LGBT culture today here. Here I am in front of the American Theater in Phoebus at 125 Mellon Street. The American Theater for, at least a decade has provided LGBT-friendly or centered fare for its audiences. For example, under the direction of openly gay Malcolm Curry, the theater provided the gay male Italian ballet, La Trocaderos de Monte Carlo, in April of 2014. The Trocs are world famous. They've been around since 1974, and they play with the conventions of ballet by having men play both female and male roles. During the 1980 academic year, Dwight Madison, a teacher of government and civics here at Hampton High School, had a speaker series for his classrooms, a speaker series that focused in on discrimination and prejudice of all kinds, and he invited 4 members of the Unitarian Gay and Lesbian Caucus from Norfolk, the Unitarian Church from Norfolk, to come here to speak in a classroom on January 15, 1980. The students loved them. There was no problems. Parents had no problems with it until a mailed copy of our own community press, which had covered the event, was given to one of the city councilmen. When that happened, all hell broke loose. The city council resolved here never to have anything like that ever happen again in a high school classroom here in Hampton. But the Superintendent Anderson, to his credit, and also parents and students rallied around Mr. Madison, and they said, look, this is a First Amendment issue. Even though we don't like homosexuality itself, we want to hear about it, and we want to hear about real-world situations. The Hampton Arts Commission chose an important world premiere for its season opener in October 1990. It was Ronald Caltabiano's innovative sextet for a variety of instruments that reflected the composer's conflicting emotions and sentiments when he viewed the AIDS quilt, the name's AIDS quilt in Washington, D.C. in 1987. This piece was very, very moving and led many, many to see the real seriousness and scope of the pandemic as it was raging on. The piece was so important that the commission was able to get top drawer musicians from New York City, from Lincoln Center, to perform here. Here I am in front of St. John's Episcopal Church, the oldest English-speaking congregation in North America, having been launched in the year 1610. St. John's has survived all kinds of wars here in Virginia, but was very divided over the issue of gay clergy in the year 1996. In that year, Richard Bardish was employed as assistant rector for the congregation. He had been out to the bishop and had actually been the subject of a nationally published study of gay clergy that was well known. He was a Hampton native, having been born in Hampton itself, and knew some people in the congregation, so it seemed to be a no-brainer that he would be a very good employee. But the rector didn't know exactly, explicitly, before his employment. Rodney Calkins, and also members of the congregation didn't know that either, and therefore they felt betrayed, and they also felt that an openly gay person could not serve as a good person of the clergy, especially for such an old congregation as St. John's. Therefore, they withheld their money. $60,000 budget deficit appeared, and Bardish had to withdraw in order to quell the controversy in 1997. He himself went on to have a celebrated career with Bishop Spong in Newark, New Jersey, after all, but again, that left a bad taste in everyone's mouth in the mid-90s. In 2019, St. Mark's Episcopal Church moved their worship services here to St. John's, but for years before, St. Mark's was the most progressive Episcopal church in the area, having adopted the principles of integrity very early on. Under the tutelage of Pastor Peggy Bulow, they invite all kinds of candidates there to talk that were LGBT friendly, that have all kinds of workshops on LGBT culture and history. It was a wonderful and inclusive congregation, and still is. In this century, some financial problems led to some of the congregation leaving, and therefore now they had to come back to their mission church, that being St. John's. The Peninsula AIDS Foundation, PAF, was the leading AIDS service organization here from 1987 to 2003. Its main offices were in Newport News, but it raised money here in Hampton at the Charles H. Taylor Center. At PAF, you could get counseling, you could get access to medicines, you could get community support. It was really, really needed, particularly at the height of the pandemic in the early and mid-90s. And here at the Charles Taylor Center, art auctions provided the monies for those activities. Art auctions from local artists, pieces donated from local artists would be sold, and the monies would be given then back to the organization. I'm at Berries for Hair, owned and operated by Barry Menzer for at least 40 years, here now at 40 Wine Street. Barry and his husband, attorney Michael Hamer, have been a bastion, a cornerstone of LGBT activism for the whole region for years, having hosted important fundraisers for such LGBT-friendly candidates as Mark Herring in 2013, and for such important causes as Old Dominion's Gay Studies Endowment in 2011. Barry in particular is well connected to the older ladies of Hampton and Newport News elites, and even does the hair of Ralph Northam. Barry and Michael also were the first gay couple to be admitted to the exclusive Hampton Yacht Club, which is a bastion of Old Hampton. Here I am at Tysinger Motors, which since 1926 has provided quality cars and service to its customers. Tysinger is well known for its customer service, whether the person drives a modest Hyundai or a very expensive Mercedes-Benz. Tysinger has also been very involved in gay rights and LGBT organizations for at least 20 or 30 years. And that was partly inspired by the owner's son's difficult coming out as gay. They decided to put their money where their mouth was and decided to support LGBT organizations very publicly and very frequently. In fact, Tysinger was a frequent venue for harbor meetings in the 20-teens. Harbor, of course, is the Hampton Roads Business Outreach, the LGBT Chamber of Commerce locally. And also, in February of 2019, Tysinger served as the venue for the launch party for Hampton Roads Pride itself. And the keynote speaker was the First Lady of Virginia, Pam Northam. Here we are at Carousel Park in downtown Hampton, where in 2019, June 2019, we had Hampton Roads Pride and the City of Hampton sponsoring a connected yet separate Pride Fest event that had all kinds of entertainments, including drag shows, vendors, all kinds of speeches and from local officials. It was very well attended and very well received, despite the rain. This had been in the making for several years, since 2015, where each Wednesday of Pride Week, Hampton Roads Pride had held a similar celebration, but at the hotel in the background, the Landing, which at that time was called the Crown Plaza. And from that, we had this wonderful celebration at Carousel Park in 2019. Now at the Landing, we'd have that party there, and then of course in the evening, the LGBT Center would have a cruise on the Miss Hampton, which went into the bay and had further drag performances and other festivities. Yeah, the Pride festivities at Carousel Park grew so fast that since the pandemic, we've had to move the Pride festivities to Phoebus. That is a perfect venue for it in Phoebus because it has all the wonderful restaurants, bars, and places to meet you can imagine. Well, that concludes our look at Hampton's queer history from the beginnings to now. I'd like to thank Hampton Roads Pride in particular for launching this effort, which is part of a series to look at the hidden histories of our 7 cities here at Hampton Roads. If you have additional information you'd like to give to me about that history, please contact me at chford@nsu.edu or visit the Hampton Roads Pride website.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So as Dr. Ford is taking his place, ooh, this is hot. Yes, all right. We can continue with that applause. So that was an amazing presentation. Hopefully you all were able to see something that you didn't know before tonight. And we are going to open the floor for a few questions and answers. We do have an audience joining us virtually online, so we're going to open the floor for questions. I had some technical difficulties at the beginning of our program, so I wasn't able to read Dr. Ford's bio, but if you all would please allow me this time. All right. Little soundtrack intro. So our facilitator this evening, Dr. Charles Howard Ford, PhD, pronouns he, him, is a tenured full-time professor of history at Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia. He's been at Norfolk State since 1992, and he has won the highest award of excellence in teaching, research, and service in 2014. Accordingly, he is a published expert a published expert on the local histories of 20th century Virginia and Texas, having co-written 4 books and over 12 articles with his research partner, Jeffrey Littlejohn of Sam Houston State University. Their elusive equality, desegregation, and resegregation in Norfolk's public schools changed the port city's official story by including African-American voices and sources. Their research has won several awards both in Virginia and in Texas. For example, in 2020, they won the C.K. Chamberlain Award for the best article in East Texas Historical Journal for 2019. For this, Jeffrey L. Littlejohn and Dr. Charles Ford, historian and activist Joseph Lynn Clark, and the Texas Commission on Interracial Cooperation, East Texas Historical Journal, volume 57, number 2, in 2019, 79 through 125. Ford has served on various boards of trustees, including that of the Tidewater AIDS crisis after the 2002 Community Task Force from 1994 to the year 2011, and on that of the Norfolk Public Library System from February 23 to December 2022. He's also served on the Hampton Roads Pride Board of Directors since October 2018 and was the board secretary from 2018 to 2020. In recognition of both of his scholarly expertise and community service, Dr. Ford was named one of the Equality Virginia's Outstanding Virginians in 2016. So very accomplished doctor that we have before us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that very generous introduction.
Absolutely. Did a little research
a little late,
on
but that's fine.
No, but you do your justice. And before I take my seat and open it up for question and answer, I did want to acknowledge we have joining with us the current president of Hampton Roads Pride, Mr. Jeffrey Ryder. Thank you for joining. All right.
Thank you. Again, you can see Hampton does have a real rich history, a very history that expands over the years and also over the geography of the city. And again, there are all kinds of other stories that I uncovered that just add to that story. But you see that very familiar stories of the founding of Virginia and just one of the principal investors and having his name, Risley, and never knowing until recently that, again, he dressed as a woman as a teenager. Was the muse of William Shakespeare. And that's a connection. The very name of Hampton and Hampton Roads has a queer dimension, which I think is kind of interesting. And of course the pirates, very, very familiar story from Hampton's history. But just the twist on it, just looking at it from an LGBT standpoint, is quite interesting. Before, people would call themselves LGBT, right? You have, the type of behaviors or the type of relationships that would be there that we now identify with that acronym. So I think that's interesting in that sense. And of course, Leonard Maklavic, that's just the national history, but usually it's local people that provide the material for history. And that's the hidden history, which is, I think, the most fascinating. But you probably knew about Leonard Maklavic history. If you didn't, again, that tie to the national was only made possible through, Langley Airfield Base, which has been here again since 1921. So what was your reaction to the film? Was it too long, too short, or what do you think we should change in terms of our next series of films? Because again, each city will have one, and we plan at least 2 or 3 more for Norfolk. We only looked at Ghent, and we'll have downtown, and then the area around the eastern Norfolk, and then of course all the way to Ocean View. So any reactions?
I would add that Mark Tysinger took on the Virginia Automobile Dealers Association when he included domestic partners in their health insurance coverage. The VADA did not like that, and he said, I don't care. You will either change your rules or I will no longer be a part of it. And of course, that was because of his own son. So I really admire Mark for standing up. He was a good ally.
And we're going to miss Tysinger. Of course, Tysinger is closed since this May,
Right.
that spot was made. But certainly Tysinger was a real boost to the Hampton Roads business outreach, hosting it several times throughout the 2018. Any other questions or reactions?
No, please, we got the audience on
Okay,
live.
there you go. Sorry about that. I just have a reaction. The epitaph, I almost cried. I could have just spent a second more with it. The idea of, I got this award for just could not get over that. I could have used a second more with that, a special link maybe attached to it. That was powerful.
Yeah, yeah. And that was, again, I mean, he tried to be as respectable as possible when he made his position. Being a Republican and being a decorated veteran of Vietnam, and you would think that that itself, that background would allow him in the 1970s of all times to be treated better by the military than he was. And not the case. And then, of course, the pandemic came and took him away. Yeah, very sad.
Will there be additional resources that will link to the videos that we watch that we can go online and study more about or
Yes,
get
yes.
involved with?
One of my sources, of course, was the Our Own Community Press, which featured certainly the St. John's controversy, and also the Hampton High School controversy. It took a long time to get those yearbook pictures, but the Hampton Public Library was very good in terms of hunting those down. They didn't have one for 1980, but they did have one for 1978 and 1981, so it was fine. We used those in that sense. And the idea was that the local people in that controversy were happy with the speakers, gay and lesbian speakers from Norfolk, speaking about their life. They had been invited, and it wasn't until the politicians got word of it that it became a huge controversy. And so that controversy also doubled down with the controversies over library access to Our Own Press. As you probably know, in Virginia Beach, they limited it to one copy of the Our Own Press. You would have to essentially loan it out and look at it, as a librarian is looking at you, so you don't do anything nefarious. They did the same thing at Thomas Nelson Community College in terms of the library with Our Own, restricting access to monitored one. The time you couldn't take it out or with you back to your seat. Wow. Yeah. So those kinds of stories, I think, are very powerful because they're so detailed, and they really strike at this idea of LGBT's people's position being out, or they accept it or not, and it really depends on if the people like them or not, or their context, or again, but even if they're respectable and they have all these medals and everything like Maklavic, they're still treated this time very poorly. The superintendent, though, of Hampton Schools stood up for the teacher, but only because they made it a civil liberties issue and not a gay rights one. So that sort of casting of the controversy made it more respectable for at least the people at the time. Yeah.
So I'm kind of just coming in on all this information and that there's this series and multiple, and just being privy to social media, and that's how I found out about it. Sometimes you see comments, and one of the comments I saw was, "Why does this matter now?"
Right, yeah.
And I just continue to tell people as I'm working on different projects that culture without context,
Oh, yeah.
you've got to have it. So, just aside from providing all these episodes and information, will one in these series be dedicated to remind people when they ask, like, well, why is this important? There's Gay Pride Month and this and that. And it's like, I continue to just answer questions like, well, don't marginalize someone to 1 month. That's ridiculous.
Right.
But how do we respond to the ignorant response of, why does this matter now? Because it does. And that's something I think people against us we have to deal with are
Right.
going to say.
Right, well, I think history gives, our identities or our communities much more credibility, that they're not manufactured or they're not artificial. They're certainly very part of the grassroots, and they're linked to other communities, intrinsically linked. They're not completely on a separate scale somewhere else, right? So those kinds of connections, I think, are so important, especially looking at familiar, at least people will think of familiar parts of history and giving them this sort of lens, this different perspective on the same idea of facts. I think that's so important.
So it's the perspective is really the important thing, like that,
Well, this perspective, the different perspectives give, make it more interesting in one sense, but also much more relevant to people, to galvanize them to protect their rights, because the idea is that, it's been a long struggle, there's a long history of this. It's just another ramification or another round in this ending struggle for equality and for acceptance.
Well, I think it's super awesome, and I hope that we can all share it. So where will we be looking to share and get more information again for all of this?
Well, we have this posted at our site, Hampton Roads Pride, under media resources, and it's so media resources and then red lights and civil rights. And there's a film on Ghent, which largely looks at Ghent from the 1960s to the present. And then this film is much more comprehensive, it's more chronological. And we'll have ones that were thematic, say looking at sports, or looking at women, or looking, we'll have thematic as well as geographic as well. So there's an endless amount of material out there that I'm uncovering, right, as I'm doing this, because again, there's no LibGuide, there's no library guide to show you where these stuff is. It's just, you have to sift through a lot of police records, through government records, through the newspapers, both mainstream and LGBT, people's diaries, and also their oral histories that we have to capture before people die, because of the liberation generation, they're getting older. And Kathleen Rhodes has done a wonderful job at Old Dominion in capturing, especially women veterans from places like the Norton Sound and other ships, of some of the first women in the Navy.
Hello. Your film does mention that Hampton didn't have a gay bar, but it did have a gay house spa and gym in the 70s. It was the European House Spa, which the building was just recently, about 2 months ago, torn down. It was located across behind Kroger. And that house spa, I was a member in '74, and that house spa had a mixed sex workout room, but then they had separate pools and separate saunas. So there was one gentleman there that was very gregarious, and he got everybody together to go to parties at his house on Armstead Avenue. He was from the military. And that's where I met Lenny for the first time, Lenny Matlovich.
Oh, yeah.
And he struck me as when I think about him, he struck me as a very quiet man. I saw him later in New York City, it was still late 70s, after he made Times, but I met him before he got on the cover of Times. And thinking about him, he was just a very quiet gentleman, tall man, but so I always think that perhaps we needed somebody a little bit more in your face to do what he had to do, or where he was put.
Yeah.
Like,
Was that a chain? Do you know? The European
House Spa was a chain. There was one in New York City as well.
There was one here, actually, I think in Chesapeake, that became a YMCA in Greenbrier. It's called the European Health spa. So, yeah, all right, that's interesting.
I'd also like to take this time, Dr. Ford, if I may, to express the LGBT importance here of the community and their inclusivity here within the city of Hampton. My role with the city is I serve as the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, as well as our LGBTQ liaison to our city manager's office. So essentially, I am providing safe space to make sure that all of our residents have a welcoming sense of inclusivity, that they feel belonged and they feel included in all the programs and support systems that we offer. One of the very near and dear things, supports that we do from our office, and there's some information on the table when you all leave today, is that we respond to the Human Rights Campaign's MEI score. Is anybody familiar with the MEI score? Couple head nods? Okay, so I'll tell you. The MEI score is the Municipal Inequality Index scorecard, and it's facilitated by the Human Rights Campaign, and virtually it's a scorecard that rates municipalities on their inclusive services for the LGBTQ community as a city, municipality. So what benefits are we offering for the LGBTQ community? What healthcare services? Are we providing homeless safe space? Are we providing resources for housing, for transitional housing, for HIV testing? So in the city of Hampton, before I came here, we responded to the scorecard in 2014. Our rating could range from 0 to 100, and the city of Hampton rated at a 0. But we had a place to start. We had a place to start. So I'm very proud of the work that previous directors before my tenure here, as well as myself and our program coordinators' efforts to responding and making sure that we're not just checking these boxes off, but that we are creating space and providing services for the community. We just responded and received our official scorecard for 2023 at a perfect 100 score. So it's very impressive, and that's for you all. So the needle can be moved is the moral of the story, and just letting individuals know that wherever you may reside, in whatever city you may reside, hopefully everyone here chose Hampton, but if you all have joined us from another city, just know that there is a scorecard that will rate your cities, and you can look that up, HR, Human Rights, yes, hr.org, HRC, Human Rights Campaign, hrc.org, right, hr.org to take you to somebody's human resources. So hrc.org, and you can type in any city, and any city that's responding, you can see where their scorecard is and the different categories in which they're ranked. So it makes me really feel good to understand that we are not just creating film for production, that we're not just throwing pride parties because we've got beautiful drag queens in the area, but we're actually doing the good work, and we're making sure that everyone feels welcome, supported, and included in all the things that we do. So I just wanted to throw that in there because it does lend to the history and the current state of where we are. Absolutely. Thank you so very much.
Very good, thank you.
I think we have a few more, some time for maybe a few more questions, if we do. Yes, coming to the back.
Not particularly a question, but I won't say in response, but in relationship. I think there's always a fight. As a woman in Virginia, in 1974 was the first time I could hold my own credit card. You know what's happened over the years. So it never stops, no matter where we are or what we do, you know, with those kinds of things. And I want to make this point, and it might just be me and my hearing aids, but the background and the music, I was having difficulty understanding, and I don't know if, again, that was just me, and I don't point it out, but I know that, oh, okay. Okay. Right, so I don't know if it was music that was on in here, if it was music from the film.
Right. Well, the music during the film is usually at the beginning and the end. We try to restrict it to there. We did have smooth jazz in the lobby, but I don't think that was the problem. They turned that on. But the sound has been a concern of mine, and I think we'll pay more attention to that for presentation.
Okay,
Yeah, but
thank you.
for that.
Yes, no, it was, and I was here in 1981 as a teacher, and I was not aware of that incident. That totally went over me, and I'm
Wow,
usually
okay.
pretty perceptive of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, and Dr. Anderson was an absolutely wonderful
Yes,
superintendent.
yes, and he was the one that backed the teacher up. Yeah.
I think the most important thing to remember is it's not done in one day. It's not done in one evening. It's not done in 1 month. It's done with our whole life. So anybody watching that isn't here tonight, this is all of our job all the time. So thank you for doing this.
And I also do at Pride Fest in Norfolk. I have a tent that I've had at least for 12 or 13 years. Various placards from various parts of the city, very themed. Also have a place where people give their own history and record it, give it to the archives. And so please come to Pride Fest on June 22nd and visit. Do I have a hashtag myself? No, I should probably. I should, yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, but I do have. We're beginning a museum, an LGBT museum of Hampton Roads, beginning in the Selden Arcade this May, and eventually, hopefully, maybe MacArthur, maybe have a satellites on the peninsula of artifacts, placards, information, almost like, not like this history museum, not as fabulous as this one, but certainly a start in terms of having a focus. Space in the Selden Arcade and then eventually MacArthur Mall. Yes.
I would just like to respond to the question earlier about why it matters. It matters for people like Matlovich, for the controversy at Hampton High. If it weren't for the home parties on Chesapeake Avenue and in my home back in the 80s and the 90s, we had no way to meet each other.
Right.
It was all by word of mouth. And so we sit here tonight openly in the city of Hampton, in Virginia, of all places, because we walk on the shoulders of those who went before us.
Right.
Had they not done these things, we wouldn't be here, and that's why this matters. We need to know, to paraphrase a line from Michelle Obama, history teaches us who we are as a people.
Thank you. Well said, yes. I think we have time for one more question. Anyone else? No?
Yes.
Okay.
So, there's so much of history that we don't know, of all kinds, right? Because where do we learn our history? From books that are controlled by our state government. I've had several kids go through Virginia history in the state, and there is so much that I know now that they still didn't know,
Right.
and still are not taught. And the bigger part of that, to answer to people who say, why is this important, is because you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. These stories are not told. There's nowhere to learn them, and we have to keep telling them, because this is all of history. That these stories, we will repeat tragedies of the past if we don't know. We think that things are all normal and all are fine, and they are not. And this is just incredibly valuable. I mean, I'm an active participant in the LGBT community, and I learned so much from watching this, because this is the only way I'm going to learn it, because someone has to tell me these things, because it's not written.
Right.
It's not put out there. It needs to be curated for us. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
All right, thank you all so very much. Dr. Ford, do you have any final words for us?
So just thank you for coming, and look forward to a whole series coming on various aspects, regions, cities of Hampton Roads.
Thank you so very much. Let's give Dr. Ford another round of applause. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen. If you all would like to look at this again and the presentation, it will be available on the Hampton History Museum's Facebook page, as well as our YouTube channel. And Dr. Ford has this video, and I believe he's going to hang around for a little bit until they kick us out of here. I believe Alan said we got to go because we got some things to take care of tomorrow. That's right. So once again, reminders for the Mosaic Festival, Saturday, April 20th. And the Fabulous Phoebus Pride Street Festival, Saturday, June 8th. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Have a great evening.